the World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, the war in Afghanistan. We also thank the Bronstein Foundation for providing funding to make our gatherings possible. And as we ask for your blessing on this program today and on the meal that we are partaking together, today we also ask that you continue to give us the motivation to keep this very important activity alive. And we ask it in your blessed name. Amen. Larry, where's our singer? Will you stand with me for the pledge of our flag and our country? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Larry, Gavin, will you do our national anthem? Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets trickling, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Thank you. You may be seated. Today, we're honored and it's my pleasure to introduce to you our program. This is Dona. Dona has been instrumental in making this museum happen. Anytime we were in trouble, or anytime we needed something, she was always here to take care of us. She has written, Dona, how many books have you written? One or two? One. Tell them, but you're going to tell them about it, I hope. Anyway, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dona.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out to attend today's Lunch, Learn, and Share program. 2 weeks from today, Bruce Green is going to be our speaker, and he's going to talk about propaganda during World War II. Also, we're getting a lot of questions about getting access to previous presentations. They are posted on Browning's genealogy website as well as the Evansville Wartime Museum's website. I was just told that when you get on to the museum site, there's something at the top that says YouTube. If you'll go there, you'll see these presentations. But the last couple, one or two, may not be there yet, but eventually they will be up there. Now, today's topic is aviation, and I'm going to start by talking about the Women's Air Force Service Pilots of World War II. This is a story about a group of women who showed not only patriotism, but the power of positive attitudes, a love of flying, and a willingness to serve no matter what the consequences were. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote in her newspaper when she found out that England was going to recruit female pilots. She wrote in her newspaper that the American women pilots were a weapon waiting to be used. And she was right, because during World War II, American women not only flew planes, but they built them, spotted them, and proved to be an incredible asset to World War II. 1,078 American women flew planes during World War II as part of the WASPS, Women's Air Force Service Pilots. And they would be one of the many secret weapons used by the United States during World War II. Believe it or not, the topic of women in aviation and the military goes back as far as 1930, when the War Department mentioned to the Army Air Corps about the possibility of using women as ferry pilots. But the Air Corps said, that's utterly unfeasible. Women are too high-strung for wartime flying. The attitudes, I mean, come on. 10 years later, ironically enough, the Air Corps is now proposing 100 women pilots to be used to help fly and transport planes. And General Hap Arnold, Chief of Air Corps, turned this proposal down as unnecessary. Then Pearl Harbor happens, December 7th, 1941, and now the United States is plunged into war with Japan, Germany, and Italy. 343 civilian male pilots are now assigned to the Army Corps Ferry Command's domestic wing, but the supply of male pilots began to dwindle because they were needed in Europe and Asia to help fly the planes during the war. So there was a huge need for pilots here in the United States. Enter two women. This is a story of Nancy Love and Jacqueline Cochran. And we'll talk about both of them and the pilots that they recruited. Let's start with Nancy Love. Now, Nancy's flying went back to when she was 16, when she got her pilot's license, and she would become a test pilot and an air racer. When war broke out in Europe in 1940, she proposed that the military use 49 trained pilots, which she was turned down by General Hap. And one of the reasons he turned her down was because of a promise he made to Jackie Cochran. And we'll get back to that promise in just a minute. Nancy's husband, Robert, was called to active duty at the beginning of the war to become Deputy Chief of Staff with Air Command. Now, Nancy went with him. Her husband worked with Colonel William Tunner, who was leading the Air Transport Command and needed pilots. And one day he was discussing this need for pilots with Robert Love when Robert mentioned to him that his wife was an experienced pilot. So we asked to meet Nancy. And based on their conversations, she presented her proposal to him, and he went for it. So he adopted the proposal using 28 pilots, and these will be known as the original pilots. These are the first 28 pilots to become part of the ferrying squadrons. And they were asked to have a minimum of 500 hours. Well, every one of these women had more than that. Most of them had 1,000 or more at the time. Colonel's recommendation, and he asked that these women be commissioned, but he was turned down. So they would become civilian pilots as part of these ferrying commands. And they were originally assigned only to fly small single-engine planes because, once again, they didn't really trust the ability of these women to fly the bigger planes, but they proved them wrong. And they would go on to fly some of the planes that even the male pilots really did not like to fly. Now, the initial training for the original 28 took place in Newcastle, Delaware. Now, because these women were civilians, they were given no funds. They had to pay for their transportation, their housing, and their food to go to this training. They were put in tiny rooms that didn't have curtains on the windows, so that when they changed clothes, they had to either step out into the hallway or do it in the dark. This is just the beginning of some of the barriers and the issues that these women would be forced to face because of discrimination. Here's an example. Now remember, there are male civilian pilots as well. They were not subject to some of the things that these women were forced to do. And an example is inspections. The women had to go through monthly room inspections, even though the male pilots did not have to. Enter Jackie Cochran. Jackie is another experienced pilot. She got her license in the early 1930s and set records that to this day have not been broken. She set the world speed record, women's world speed record in 1937. No other pilot held more speed, distance, or altitude records in aviation history than Jackie Cochran. She volunteered as a pilot for the Royal Air Force in Britain and was the first woman to fly a bomber across the Atlantic. Now, before she left, and we're going to get back to that General Hack now. Before she left, she knew General Hack Arnold, and she said, don't make any decisions regarding female pilots until I get back. Well, then she finds out about the ferrying squadron that's being run by Nancy Love. So she leaves Britain, comes back to the United States, and General Hack signs her up to create another program, this time for inexperienced women who would require extensive training to fly planes. So now there are two programs in place. The first one was using experienced pilots, the other one to recruit new pilots. But at one point, General Hack says, we don't really need two programs. So he combines the two to create the WASPS, the Women's Army Air Force Service Pilots. Because of her political connections, Jackie Cochran was put in charge of the WASP, while Nancy Love will become the executive officer of the ferrying division. Now, Nancy Love and Jackie Cochran did not care for each other. They were at odds. Nancy's goal was to make the most efficient use of the women pilots in whatever capacity was needed by the military, whereas Jackie was just seeking to further her own ambitions by becoming head of a military corps of women pilots. She thought she just wanted them to do the jobs that the men didn't want to do. Her flamboyant behavior and embellishment of her importance put off a lot of people. So Jackie Cochran wasn't well liked. So the program is combined. They're now called the WASPS. And over 25,000 women applied to become part of this program. 1,078 successfully completed the training. After that original training class in Delaware, the next one took place at the Houston Municipal Airport. There were no barracks. The women were not allowed to use the dining rooms on base. And training started so early they couldn't even walk to town to get breakfast. Bathrooms were off limits. These women had to walk a half mile to use the closest bathroom. Now, what does that remind you of? The movie, Hidden Figures, remember that? Well, they face the same type of discrimination from men. A lot of things, even though they're on base, they're getting trained, they just weren't allowed to do the things that the males were allowed to do. They weren't even given uniforms. They were given hand-me-down overalls that the men had used. And they joked that these overalls came in 3 sizes, large, large, and large. So you can see what it looked like when they were when they used these. Some of the women actually made their own clothes to be used as part of this program. And because they were in the Texas area, they had problems with locusts, scorpions, snakes, and dust. Makes you want to move to Texas, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeehaw! The training then moved from Houston to Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas. And that's where the rest of the training classes took place. Interestingly enough, there was a sudden influx of emergency landings from male pilots who just kind of wanted to check things out and see what was going on with these female pilots. These training, even though some of them were married, they had to be chaperoned and were asked to dress nicely and conservatively when they were off base. In fact, they were referred to as Cochrane's Convent. This is the logo. Oh, I got one with me. Let's get it out. It was called Fifinella. Now, some of you may know and some of you may not know that Walt Disney actually designed some of the logos used for some of the divisions of World War II. And he was asked to design one for the WASPS, and they used Fifinella, which was a character originally written about in a book by Roald Dahl called The Gremlins. So he and his staff created Fifinella, and it would become the official mascot of the WASPS, and was seen on their uniforms, and can still be seen on the uniforms of some of the women in aviation today. These are the designations given to each of the trainees, and it indicated what class they were into. The number on the left is the year. The W in the middle just referred to the fact that they were women. The number on the right was the class that year. So this particular designation would refer to the third female training class of 1944. When they completed training, they were assigned to a lot of the camps across the United States. Some of the women flew in and out of Camp Davis in North Carolina. Now, here's where, before I do this, let me go back to training. I talked about some of the prejudice barriers that these women had to go to. Here's a prime example. To complete and be certified as a pilot for the WASP division, you had to pass a checklist inspection. Some of these women were propositioned by these inspectors. If they were turned down, these inspectors would flunk them. And the military found out about what was going on, and they assigned 2 inspectors from then on. So they would always have at least 2 people certifying that they had finished their completion and passed. Here's another example of the discrimination at Camp Davis in North Carolina. The mechanics threatened to go on strike because they didn't want to have anything to do with these polytruck pilots. And this is at the beginning where they were restricted to the smaller planes, like the Piper Cubs. And they were required to have monthly physicals because the male doctors believed that the women's menstrual cycles had a negative effect on their physical and emotional state. But we all know that the only thing that has a negative effect on women's emotional and physical state are men. And this is a prime example of some of what these women had to endure. Now, Nancy Love said, no job. We're not going to turn any of these jobs down. We're going to prove that we can do whatever the men can do. And so here's an example of what kinds of jobs these women did. Now, we talk about ferrying, and by ferrying, what they would do is fly the planes out of cities like Evansville, Indiana, where they were produced in factories like Republic, to the coast so that the planes could be shipped off to be used in the war effort. But they also did target and glider towing to deliver supplies. These original 28 pilots, they were actually instructors, many of them. And I'll talk about a couple of them in a minute. They provided air taxi service for the military bigwigs who wanted to fly, who needed to be flown across the United States. They played the enemy in military maneuvers, and this is not a safe place to be because sometimes they use live ammo. And they were part of top secret experiments. Believe it or not, they were testing drones as far back as World War II, and some of these female pilots took part in those experiments. They had a perfect delivery rate. Now, here was one mission, 20 PT-17 open cockpit Stearman biplanes had to be flown from Minnesota to Tennessee. Now, 6 of the 20 pilots were women. The female pilots landed first. 2 days later, 12 of the male pilots still hadn't shown up. Turns out they stopped to visit girlfriends and family on the way to wherever that they were delivered. So, this is an example of the level of service that was seen by the women pilots. They proved that they could fly just about anything. 4 of the WASPs set records for flying PT-19's 2,500 miles in 4 days. Also, B-17s. Some of the male pilots thought the B-17s were too tough to fly, but a couple of the WASPs were trained secretly and proved that they could fly. Male pilots didn't like to fly the B-26s because they had a high accident rate. Well, once again, the female pilots are trained on these planes. In this case, 4 of them flew 2 B-26s over a base in Alabama, and when 4 women climbed out of the cockpit, the men went, well, maybe it's not so hard after all. 100 male pilots knew how to handle, only 100, knew how to handle the Super Fortress. 2 WASPs were trained to fire, but they were grounded so as not to embarrass the male pilots. A lot of the WASPs did indeed fly the P-47 that was made here in Evansville. Now, the first female pilot to fly a WASP was Betty Gillies, and she flew it out on the East Coast. But the first woman to fly a P-47 out of Evansville was Barbara Erickson. And the woman that you see in this plane is Teresa James, another of the originals, flying the 10,000th Thunderbolt on its inaugural flight in September of 1944. I didn't mention this, but Evansville was actually a routine stop for pilots bringing planes into Evansville to be customized at the modification plant on the airport property, as well as flying the P-47s out. Now, the modification center was on the airport property, and it was used to customize planes based on where they were going, what parts of the where the war was taking place, either the jungle, Arctic, arid temperature temperate zones, or in many cases, pilots from other countries, or allies, other allies were flying. And so the controls had to be customized for those pilots as well. There were casualties. 38 of the WASPs died as part of the WASP program. Fellow WASPs actually accompanied their bodies to their families to let them know, because remember, they're civilians. The military had no involvement in their funerals. So their fellow WASPs would take them back to their families, and they chipped in to help pay for the burial service of these women. No military honors, not even a flag for these women. It is believed that some of these casualties were a result of sabotage. The program ended in December of 1944. The war is starting to wind down. A bill was actually introduced in Congress to militarize the WASP, but it was actually turned down. 188 to 169, even though there were 300,000 other women that were part of the military, like the WASPs and programs like that. So the program is disbanded on December the 20th of 44. The WASP flew over 12,000 missions, over 9 million miles. The United States Air Force did not begin to accept female pilots until 32 years later in 1976. At the end of the program, most of the WASPs went home, married, had families, and went on with their lives. Some of them went to school, and some of them continued to stay in aviation and fly. They didn't talk about their experiences as part of the WASP because people didn't believe them. Even the military sealed their records, and years later, people just didn't believe that women actually flew as part of World War II. Let's meet some of these people. I've already introduced 2 of you. I'll tell you what happened to them. So Nancy Harkness Love was appointed a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserve in 1948. She and her husband were decorated simultaneously. He got the service medal, she got the air medal for her operational leadership in a successful training assignment of over 300 women. She died of cancer at the age of 62 in 1976. Jackie Cochran joined the Air Force Reserve in 1948 as a lieutenant colonel and was promoted to colonel in 1969. She got 3 awards for the Distinguished Flying Cross. She was the first woman to break the sound barrier in 1953, and she was a sponsor of the Mercury 13 Women Astronaut Program. She died at the age of 74 in 1980. Now here are some of the originals. I mentioned B.J. Erickson a little bit earlier. B.J. was, and you'll notice the class designation, she was in the first class of 1943. She was the first woman recruited by the Civil Air Patrol in 1940. She was actually a squadron commander for the WASPS, the 6th Ferry Command. She flew 4 2,000-mile trips and was the only woman in World War II to be awarded the Air Medal. She died in 2013 at the age of 93. Now here's a picture of Barbara getting into a P-47 in Evansville because she flew a Mustang on July 30, 1940. She flew a Mustang into Evansville to be modified at the modification center. And the operations officer said, "Have you been certified on the P-47?" She said, "No." And he said, "Well, let's do it." So she got up, did some takeoffs, some landings, and 1 hour later she was certified and she flew a P-47 out of Evansville to California on that day. Betty Gillies was another one of the originals. She was actually the first one to qualify for the pilot program. She got her pilot's license in 1929. She was only 5 foot 1.5 inches and had to have wooden blocks put on the pedals of the plane so that her feet could reach them. Because these planes weren't made for petite women. She was a squadron leader for the 2nd Ferrying Group and was second in command under Nancy Love. She was the first woman, like I said earlier, to fly P-47. This one was in Delaware. She was actually at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked and survived that attack. She died in 1998 at the age of 90. Here's another original from the first class of 1943, Teresa James. She was the woman in that photograph earlier of the 10,000th P-47. She was one of the original 20. Like I said, she was one of the first assigned to a long-distance solo flight. She received a commission in 1950 as a major in the Air Force Reserve. Her uniform is in the Smithsonian. She died in 2008 at the age of 94. This is Teresa James and Betty Gillies taken at the Modification Center in Evansville, Indiana. Cornelia Fort, another original. She was actually a trainer on Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked and was the first pilot to encounter the air fleet on Pearl Harbor. She was the second member to join Nancy Love's originals. She was the first female in American history to die on active duty in March of 1943 at the age of 24 in a crash caused by a male pilot who got too close. You might recognize this lady, Joanne Josie Wallace Orr. She was a daughter of the Wallace family who owned department stores across the United States. She joined the WASPS, went on to become a squadron commander, discharged in 1944, married Robert Orr, who was from Evansville and became the governor of the state of Indiana from 1981 to 1989. She passed away at the age of 85 in 2006. Helen Ritchie was in the 5th class of 1943. She set a lot of records as a pilot before the war even started. She was the first woman to be hired by a commercial airline called Central Airlines, now known today as United, and she flew her first flight in December of 1934 in a Ford Trimotor. Now, you may have heard that Ford Trimotor mentioned. We have one here at the museum in April. for a week. So it's a beautiful, beautiful plane. She had to quit her job for that commercial airline because the male pilots refused to fly with her. She was a co-pilot with Amelia Earhart in the Bendix Trophy race of 1934. She was the last female pilot to fly P-47 out of Evansville. She died in 1947, just 2 years after the end of the WASPS program, after committing suicide. Shirley Slade, in the 5th class of 1943, was stationed at 3 different air bases: Love Field, Dodge City in Kansas, and Harlingen in Texas. She flew Bell P-39 Airacobras and Martin B-26 Marauders, and she was featured on the cover of Life magazine in July of 1943. It was an article about the WASPS training that was taking place at the time in Sweetwater. Jean Landis, 4th class of 1943. She had a bachelor's degree in physical education in 1940 and a master's from Wellesley. She got a pilot's license in 1941 as a part of the civilian pilot training program. It was the only female in her class. She said the P-51 Mustang was her favorite plane. In her last delivery, she flew a B-51 around the Statue of Liberty, just to remember what she went through in the past 2 years. She passed away last December at the age of 104. Now I looked it up, and in 2019, it was said that of the original 1,078, about 35 of these women are still alive. Now that was about 4 years ago, so I'm sure we've lost quite a few. There are still a few out there. Ying Li was Chinese, joined the Chinese Flying Club at Portland, and was one of the first Chinese-American women to earn a pilot's license in 1932. She tried to join the Chinese Air Force, but they turned her down. So, in November 1944, so she joined the WASPS. And her B-63 collided with another one due to confusion in the control tower. She was pulled from the burning wreckage with her jacket still smoldering, and she died 2 days later. There were African-American pilots at this time. One of them was Bessie Coleman, the first African-American and Native American woman to get a pilot's license in 1921, but she wasn't allowed to be trained here in the United States, so she learned French and took her training in France. She died in a plane crash at the age of 34. Willow Brown became the first African-American woman to receive her license here in the United States in 1938. However, African-American women were not allowed to join the WASPS, so they were not part of the program. Believe it or not, they made a movie about the WASPS during World War II. It debuted in February 1944 and was based on a book written in 1941 called Looking for Trouble. And it tells the story of the original 28, the Women's Auxiliary Squadron, and Loretta Young playing the role of Nancy Love. But the movie didn't do real well. It actually lost $186,000. You have to think about the time this movie was released, when the general public is not ready to accept women in the workforce or as pilots. It wasn't until 33 years after the WASPS were disbanded that a bill was passed and signed by Jimmy Carter that grants veteran status to the WASPS that were part of this program. They can now be buried at Arlington, effective 2015, but only ashes can be taken at this point because ground burial is limited now because of lack of space. In 2009, President Obama signed a Senate bill that awards the WASPS the Congressional Medal of Honor to the WASPS pilots, and you see a few of those pilots standing on either side of President Obama. This is the highest expression of national appreciation for distinguished achievements and contributions by individuals or institutions. You probably remember this. The Sweetwater, Texas Training Center for a lot of the classes is now a museum for the WASPS, dedicated to honoring the life and legacy of the women Air Force service pilots. The problem is, this place is in the middle of nowhere, and every time I try to go there for one of their celebrations, you have to go through Dallas, and then you have to jump up to Amarillo, I think, and there was like a 12-hour flight delay in Dallas. I mean, it's not easy to get to. We're trying to talk Mark Browning into flying us down. Here's a quote from one of the pilots. The proudest moment of my life wasn't when I graduated from college or soloed my first plane, or when I obtained my commercial rating, or received the Air Force Meritorious Service Medal or the Lady Hay Trophy. None of these times. It was when I received my silver wings as a graduate of the first class of women to receive military cadet flight training. I was one of 23 of my 28 classmates to complete the training. After graduation from the class of WASPS at Ellington Field in 43, I was stationed at Newcastle, based in Delaware, under the command of Betty Gillies, and she flew B-24s, B-25s, B-26s, D-63s, and 15 other types of aircraft. Here's another quote by Adele Henderson Ulachek. You don't need legislation to prove something. You can be whatever you set your heart and head to be, and don't let anyone tell you you can't be, because 1,078 women pilots did it in World War II. These women served as mentors for the women in the Air Force today and women in aviation today. Here's just a few of the women inspired by their lives. Jerry Cobb, who was a Desert Storm pilot, Kelly Hamilton, a military pilot, Eileen Collins, an astronaut, and Terry London Reinhardt, one of the first 10 women to be hired by a commercial airline in 1976. Well, that's the end of the program. Thank you. I have something special to show you when we're through with questions. But we'll open up the floor now for anyone who might have some questions. Yes. Well, they proved. Yeah. Yes. He's wondering if they flew for England as part of World War II and going through 70s and things like that, they would have gotten recognition. But keep in mind, they did fly those planes here in the United States. In fact, at one point, someone assigned 2 of the originals to fly a plane across the Atlantic to deliver them at the last minute. The military said, no. Women are not going to fly these planes across the Atlantic.
Donna?
Yes.
How much did these planes get paid?
I don't know that they did get paid.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah. Remember, they were civilians. They may have gotten some type of nominal fee, but remember, it would not have been part of the military.
They did get paid.
So they did get something. We just don't know how much.
Makes you wonder, estimating.
Yes.
The Nancy Love, is the Love Field named after her?
Probably.
No,
It's not?
I don't think it was back in way back for, I think, Eagle and Praise in California or something.
Named after male pilots. But we can tell everybody.
If it wasn't for us males, you wouldn't be here.
If it wasn't for us females, you wouldn't be here.
Wow. So surface.
Any other questions? None? Okay.
or to continue flying after the war?
I don't know. I don't know. She may have. Now, someone told me before my presentation today that Marcia Yaki was a WASP. So we looked her up on Wikipedia, and all it said was that she was a part of the weather, the organization that controls the weather in World War II. Yes.
I heard that she was 100th person to get her, 100th woman get her helicopter.
It would just be really
I
interesting.
couldn't hear that.
She was the 100th woman to get her helicopter
A
license.
helicopter. So
She was,
yes.
Did Amelia Earhart contribute to the war effort?
No, she died before that.
Did she?
Yeah, her plane went down, remember, before Pearl Harbor. Anyone else? Okay. I wanted to let everybody know that we have a Warbird weekend coming up, June 9th, 10th, and 11th. We have 4 planes coming in. One is a C-47. This was the lead plane for the airborne invasion of Normandy. So that one will be here a week from tomorrow, along with 3 other planes. You can reserve flights on these planes through GulfCoastWing.org for the 3 smaller planes, and that's allbrother.org for the C-47. There are flyers at the front desk that you can take home with you that is an exact copy of this, so if you have more questions. Remember, we also have tank rides on the 1st and 3rd Saturdays of the month. You can go to our website to reserve rides, and they're starting to fill up. Now, to continue our topic of aviation, I'm sure all of you remember Major Alan Sanderson, who flew a P-47 Thunderbolt plane in World War II in Africa and Italy. 118 missions in Africa and Italy. He was part of the 64th Squadron, the 57th Fighter Group, and the 12th Air Force. That's a photo of Alan during World War II in front of his plane, the Lady Jane. But he was also a key player here at the Wartime Museum. He was on the board of directors, and Alan was an active volunteer here. That's a photo of Jan Howell, myself, and Alan painting the World War II Honor Gallery over there back in 2017. And here's a look at, he attended every event that we had here at the museum. And as you know, he passed away a year ago in January at the age of 99. These are photos of Alan in the war and photos of Alan here at the museum. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the photos of him in World War II. So let's turn the lights up, because we're going to honor Alan today by unveiling something over there by the P-47 that is Nancy Levy back there. Where is she? There. And we want to give her a microphone. Right over there, walking towards the plane. This is Alan's wife, Nancy Sanderson. What we're unveiling is a mannequin of Alan Sanderson. So it was designed to look like him when he flew these planes, his P-47 during World War II. So the guys are going to lift. Go ahead, Mike. So before you leave, you're going to want to get a close-up of this. Because it looks just like his World War II photos. We moved it out a little so you folks could see it, but we're going to keep it stationed right under his name that you can see on the back end of the plane over here. And we're going to have Nancy say a few words.
Every day that I come into this building, his aura is around the building and the drive that all the volunteers have. He really loved this, and so he probably wouldn't have appreciated his name on the plane because that's who he was. And for you all to have dedicated the statue or model for him, he would just be, now that wasn't necessary. There's a lot of other people that need to be recognized, not me. So it warms my heart, and makes me work harder here. So I appreciate this and the gentleman that designed it.
Michael Hicks.
Michael Hicks. And Donna and Michael Hicks have been working together for a while. So this is pretty special. Made my day. Thank you so much.
Nancy, you wanted to say something about the school program?
Yes, I want to thank you for your donations when
Yeah, get a mic.
Oh, we're going to give you a microphone.
I take one for each hand. Going along with what we did this morning, we are going to have 440 EVSC students come through the museum starting June the 5th. And we have the tours set up. We also have special areas where they will learn about the Pledge of Allegiance, where they will know the behavior that you're going to provide. You're going to be taught that. And they'll have some history along with it. Then, as an activity, your dollars and pennies and nickels, we're going to make bracelets. Red, white, and blue bracelets with USA on them. So that will be a take-home gift. We have another volunteer. She's going to be seated over in this area, and she's going to talk to the students about before, during, and after. When did these foods come into existence? Like Spam, you all know that. Gatorade, cookies. So we have that to go, and then we have like Lynn made some victory puzzles through the help of Stephanie Pictures. I'm going to be Rosie the Ribbon. So I have my outfit, thanks to you. I have my outfit already. I wore it at one of the car shows a couple of weeks ago, and the bandana is just perfect, and my outfit. So I'm going to have words on my uniform that say strong, equality of rights. I'm a symbol for women. So it's so exciting to sit around with these great volunteers and plan things for kids. It's like a dream come true. When I taught, I wanted them to go station to station so they would know when they finished the verbs that they would go to the nouns and go to the pronouns or something to that effect. So we are taking these little flags. I have a wrap on this, so I'm going to go for it. So one flag says the Rosies. So she or he gets 5 children, 6 children, 7 children. They go from station to station to station. And by the time they finish the day, they will have gone through 5 different stations. So if you have time to walk, I'll be happy to talk to you about walking with kids. Thank you for your donation and your generosity to the museum.
Thanks, Nancy. That's it, folks. Thanks for coming out today.